For some, it's win and get in, and for others, it's all about positioning. But with fantasy playoffs starting next week, we need these wins now more than ever. But a great week always starts with the waiver wire. So today, we're going to break it down, give you the best players at every position. Let's talk about it. Now, thankfully, there's no bye weeks this week, but this is still a play at the quarterback position where if you have a Bo Nix, who has a very tough fantasy playoff schedule, or Daniel Jones as your starter, this could be a great backup play for the fantasy playoffs because he should have better matchups. Cam Ward is owned in 7% or less of your league. 40 total points over the last 2 weeks. This week he plays a divisional rival, Jacksonville, and they're a top 5 matchup for the quarterback position. This is a guy that is getting more comfortable week after week. He's getting more chemistry with these receiving options week after week. And no matter who they play, Tennessee is a terrible team. They're going to have a top 5 pick in the draft. But as far as this season, they're always down, and they're down early, meaning they're always in catch-up mode. So whether Cam Ward is using his legs, which he's been doing more the last couple of weeks, or throwing down the field a lot, he's looked a lot better, and he's putting up a lot more fantasy stats since the firing of his coach and since their bye week a few weeks back. Tennessee, Cam Ward, look, I know it's not exciting. I know it's not a guarantee, but if you have Bo Nix, who has a very tough fantasy playoff schedule, Cam Ward could be a very exciting backup option. Now let's talk about someone that we can actually start here if your receiver room is a little bit light. Christian Watson is owned in almost 50% of the major 2 platforms, so he may not be there. However, he's the number 1 option in this offense, period. No Tucker Kraft, no Jaden Reed. Christian Watson is stepping up, and he's really flourishing in that number 1 role. He's averaging 15.5 fantasy points a game over the last 2 weeks, and with Josh Jacobs dealing with injuries, like I mentioned, Tucker Kraft and Jaden Reed also dealing with injuries, and some of those guys are out for the season. This is a guy in Christian Watson that is on an offense that's trying to make a push for the number 1 seed in the conference. They need these big-time wins now more than ever. And for Christian Watson, he has 3 top 10 matchups for the wide receiver position for the rest of the fantasy season. And a lot of those come in the fantasy playoffs. So Watson, number 1 option, great matchups, great quarterback, in my opinion. He should be on your fantasy roster. But here's the tale of the tape, and we're going to run through all of these names. And yes, I know my face cam is blocking the numbers, but here's what you need to know. Everybody on your screen is owned in about 50% or less of the major 2 platforms, so this should be available for you to go out there, pick up, and potentially start if we need to here with these oh-so-important weeks ahead of us. At the quarterback position, we talked about Cam Ward. I do also want to throw out there that Joe Burrow looks like he's going to return this week in Week 13. However, if there's a setback or if something happens where he doesn't, I don't hate a Joe Flacco pickup because against his former team in the Baltimore Ravens, it could be Flacco's last NFL start, period, in his career. So again, kind of going out guns blazing with Jamar Chase in the lineup. I don't hate a Joe Flacco play in that sense. At the running back position, Ken Gainwell of the Pittsburgh Steelers, whether Rodgers is healthy or not, Ken Gainwell has averaged 12 fantasy points over the last 2 weeks. He's even found the end zone. So Ken Gainwell, a good upside in an offense that they need to start throwing the ball a bit more, especially if they want to make the playoffs. We talked about Christian Watson. Parker Washington we covered for weeks, but here is the quick synopsis. He's owned in about 40% of Yahoo leagues, 20% of ESPN leagues. He is averaging 18 points a game over the last couple of weeks since their bye week. And again, with Brian Thomas dealing with injuries and drop issues, with this offense trying to make a playoff push, they need to rely on this passing game a bit more. So Parker Washington has been very, very productive, and I think he can continue to do that heading into the fantasy playoffs. I think he's the safest receiver that I have listed here. Also, he has 2 top 10 matchups the next 2 weeks with Tennessee and Indianapolis, divisional matchups. So again, those things could be high scoring or low scoring. Regardless, I think he'll be featured. Jaden Higgins, shout out to him, man. I've covered him on this channel many, many times there in the draft process. But the last couple of weeks with Davis Mills, he's finding himself a role, man, and he is owned in only 22% of leagues. So, again, he should be out there. He's averaging 13 points a game over the last 2 weeks. Colston Loveland, he has a newfound role. Tougher schedule ahead, but if this team's going to continue to throw at the rate that they are, I think Colston Loveland has an amazing high upside. And again, he's a lot better of an option than let's say like a TJ Hawkinson or a David Njoku. Colston Loveland should be on your roster over those guys who are owned in far more percent of leagues. Will Reichard, we're going to ride the ship here. This is a guy that we've covered so many times this season. The offense is good, far from great, and a lot of that has to do with J.J. McCarthy. And then finally, this is a bit of a shocker, but the LA Chargers as the defense, a lot of people dropped them going into their bye week, which was last week. But I look at it as they're facing the Las Vegas Raiders this week. It's a top 3 matchup for the defense, total defenses this year. And they've had 2 weeks to prep for Geno Smith and company. I don't know if they need that much time, but still, you get the mojo here. Chargers should be able to generate some turnovers. And hey, with a new offensive coordinator there in Vegas, who knows how that offense is going to operate. So Chargers, 2 weeks to prep. I like them there. But that's going to do it, man. That is week 13 fantasy football waivers. The season has flew by just like that. But hey, fantasy playoffs start next week. And if you enjoyed today's video, these are going to continue to pump out every single week. So we do this, and we also do a start-sit video where you can feel free to drop your questions there in the comment section of that video every single Friday. And you do have an answer every single week before kickoff. So again, fantasy playoffs are right around the corner. It's always good to have a second opinion, and hopefully I'll see you then.